I finished replaying Mario and Luigi Dream Team around a week ago, and my gosh, my opinion has changed on the game. I won't specifically talk about my new opinion on the game here, because the topic that matters for this video is, of course, the bosses. I remade the boss ranking already before, but I genuinely am not satisfied with that video, and most importantly, that video didn't include every single boss from that game. This video, I'm not holding back. I'm going to talk about basically every single boss from this game. The only bosses I won't include is the Intasma fight at the very beginning of the game, and the Fly Guy fight at Blimport for the Jellyfish Sheets. This video will include giant battles and even every single Hoorah fight. Like I said, I'm not going to hold back. This video, of course, is my opinion. I played Mario and Luigi Dream Team on hard mode, so if you disagree but haven't ever tried hard mode, I suggest trying it first. Other than that though, let's get started. But before we get started, make sure to leave a like on the video and make sure to subscribe. Other than that, let's actually get started. Ha! You thought that I would remake this video if I had Giant Bowser still at the bottom? No, my real number 22 is Mount Pajamaja. I don't like this fight. I never liked this fight. Mount Pajamaja is easily the most forgettable giant battle in Dream Team, and because Giant Bowser and Zkeeper got better in my eyes, this fight just dropped completely. Hard mode has got me annoyed with this battle since counterattacking some of these attacks just doesn't work. Him charging into you is the main attack that bothers me. Swiping multiple times is the least reliable way to dodge attacks, and this single attack does almost half of your health. It's irritating to me personally, and it actually developed a new strategy I have for these battles. It's called spamming rhythm mushrooms. Even taking out experiences I have, this fight is still not great. I think that the concept with the big column of volcanic rock is decent enough. It at least makes that part of the fight somewhat interesting and unique. You have to either use the hammer chop or the hammer uppercut to send parts of the rock to different volcanoes. And speaking of the uppercut, I think it's a solid new attack along with the drill spin. That is literally it with the positives. The rest of the fight is not enjoyable. The attacks overall were very unmemorable to me personally, and like I mentioned, controlled pretty badly. The other concept of the fight where you have to use an uppercut to knock him over so you can use either a jump or a drill spin to damage him is just terrible. It seems harmless, but it makes your attack pattern super repetitive, and it's just not enjoyable because of that. This fight is also extremely slow. I think most giant battles are extremely slow, but this one especially is. I think it's way worse here than in other giant battles because of the repetitive system of your attacks I mentioned previously. Mount Pajamaja just isn't fun to fight. It controls badly, it's slow and repetitive. Those are really big sins in a boss fight in my opinion, and it easily lands here at the bottom of the list because of it. This used to be my favorite giant battle in Dream Team. Okay, I know why it was. While there are some positives with this fight that I of course will talk about, probably the main reason is that it had a perfect balance of being hard, but not too difficult, and having good attacks. That didn't change completely, like I still think this boss fight has good attacks, but I don't really care about anything else. I do want to mention that I was also annoyed with the controls of this fight. I specifically remember shouting in my head, I swiped up at least 3 times at the hammer attack. Of course, I adopted my strategy of just spamming rhythm mushrooms I learned from Mount Pajamaja to stay alive, which is why I actually beat this boss on the first try. It's a slow fight just like Mount Pajamaja as well, which adds to the frustration when dealing with Earthquake. I think another reason that my opinion is hurt from this fight indirectly as well is the existence of Super Peach's Castle of Fury. This giant battle from Bowser's Inside Story pulls off the concept of knocking the enemy back so much better than Earthquake does here. There really isn't much to like about this boss fight. I did mention it having good attacks, and I do stand by that, and I also think Earthquake getting that armor was a simple concept that made the fight a teeny bit more interesting. Those positives are the reason why it became higher than Mount Pajamaja, since the negatives for both of these fights are exactly the same. Good attacks can only bring you so high when all these horrible negatives just keep bringing it down, which is why it lands at number 21. I feel like if people didn't expect me to put Giant Bowser at the bottom of the list, they would expect me to put Smoldergeist. And I understand completely where you were coming from. This boss fight, no, what am I saying? This simple enemy fight is lacking a lot to be considered a boss fight. The bash tutorial here was annoying, and I know some people would just say that it's a tutorial and that's it. You can even skip the tutorial. First off, I'm at least thankful that you can skip that tutorial, cause god, it would have been awful to sit through that. But I have a question for all of you. What have you done in this game before this? I expect two answers from this. Either story or tutorials. What legitimate gameplay have we done in Mario & Luigi Dream Team so far? Really, the biggest thing is either basic minigames or fighting the tutorial enemies. After playing Dream Team so many times, I just want the game to get started, and at this point in the game, it's not even close to starting. And obviously, it being at the beginning of the game, there are no bros attacks on your end, or even a hammer. Because of this, your attacks are pretty redundant. I will say the one positive I have for this fight is a genuine positive. Since there are 4 enemies to take out, there are technically 4 attacks at once to dodge. And while these attacks are pretty boring, it's at least a bit of a challenge at the beginning of the game that I like. If you miss these attacks though, their fire doesn't go away, which I can't lie, I also found annoying. It's a nitpick, but why couldn't we just have a way to get rid of the fire ourselves? Truthfully, I shouldn't even be going into this fight deeply because it's so basic. So let's just move on to fights that I've never talked about on this channel. It's kind of strange that I've never talked about any of the Hoorahs deeply on this channel, so I might as well talk about them here. Beef Cloud is the worst out of the 4, but I don't hate this fight like other people do. It's just extremely simple compared to the other Hoorahs. While I do admit that I like Beef Cloud constantly healing itself, it's so easy to stun it that it's not really that big of a positive. He also doesn't attack you at all. He is either sleeping, which is healing himself, or he is just wiggling on the ground doing nothing. What the heck? This Hoorah doesn't even have a win condition, which is kind of disappointing because there could have been a really interesting one tied to this fight. I know it could be justified by him being such an odd circumstance to deal with already, but just imagine what conditions could have been put onto him. There really isn't much to this fight, obviously. There was potential here, but it doesn't do anything with it, which is why it's at number 19. We inverse Beef Cloud in a way to get Thunder Sass. Thunder Sass is a win condition where you can't attack, but instead you only damage him with counter attacks. Now this may sound like the infamous boss of Shroob, and yes, there are definitely similarities to that in this fight. Thunder Sass luckily is much better for 2 reasons. One reason is that this boss is in no way trying to pose as the final boss of the game. And the second reason is that the attacks from Thunder Sass are somewhat decent. They're super fast paced and it makes the battle feel at speed, which is enjoyable. But it's so fast that it becomes really short. Thunder Sass has a very small amount of HP, even for just counterattacking, which is somewhat disappointing. I also wish that the win condition got modified slightly, where you couldn't heal at all during the fight. It makes the fight impossible to lose, and the fight's fast pace would be constant. Maybe if that was the case, it would be higher even if it became a shorter fight. Either way though, I just prefer a boss to attack me, and for me to use attacks, and that's why it's number 18. Grobot is considered the first boss to many people, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. This boss just doesn't do too much to really be that much of a threat. His attacks, while somewhat fast-paced, are pretty boring and generic. The worst part about this fight is you having only the 3D red shell and the 3D green shell. Not only are these attacks kinda basic compared to later bros attacks, Both of these attacks are the exact same, which makes your side of attacks very repetitive. I personally love the change of having bro-specific bros attacks just like in Superstar Saga. There won't be much repetition with bros attacks since you aren't spamming the exact same attack multiple times in a row, but having the exact same bros attack for each bro completely defeats the point of this concept. That's personally why I find it somewhat annoying. It's at least better than just having jumps, so I won't complain too much. This is really it with this boss though. It's basic like I said, so I knew for a fact that this boss wouldn't get high, which is why it's number 17. When people explain why they love something in a video game, they could talk about any category under the sun. The graphics, the gameplay, the story, and everything is valid. But when people talk about something they absolutely despise, most people will talk about one certain thing: a bad experience. They will talk about the really horrible time they had with a specific part of a game for being unfair or extremely difficult or just straight up not fun. There is a reason why people don't tear into easy bosses unless it stands for something. Giant Bowser I always thought was a very difficult boss that felt unfair. Hard mode really made giant battles difficult, but the controls of giant battles were not great in my eyes. This of course came out at its worst in Giant Bowser, where it took me 20 tries only at the final phase. This final phase takes 10 minutes to get to, so it was a couple of hours of just annoying repetition and just thinking I'm going to fail again. Well, I have good news for the people that like Giant Bowser. I beat Giant Bowser on the first try, so I think I have a clear enough mind to give a genuine review on Giant Bowser. You guys probably knew that this segment would be long no matter where it was on the list. I'll start with what I always admit that the fight had going for it, and that is Giant Bowser's attacks. There are so many unique attacks that are pretty fast-paced and super unique compared to other giant battles in this game. This positive is also paired with the fight being very fast-paced compared to the first 3 giant battles. I also really enjoy the final giant star sequence where you have to dodge the fireballs. I like the music at this moment and I think it controls pretty well. I wouldn't say I like the Beyblade section in this fight, but I think the controls for this part are pretty overblown. I will talk about that later when I get to the Z-Keeper. Of course though, this fight is at number 16 for a reason. Why is that? Well, it really does come down from the fact that I am permanently scarred from this fight. Does the scarring affect my opinion directly? No, it doesn't. But because of how many times I've played this fight, I know exactly what Giant Bowser will do. What some people don't know about this fight is that it is completely sequenced. What Giant Bowser does in this fight in terms of what attacks he uses are not randomized in the slightest. This normally wouldn't matter, because while it would make the fight more predictable, it doesn't hurt the quality. But because of me and knowing exactly what Giant Bowser will do, I kind of go on autopilot and dodge everything super easily. This fight is not annoying to me anymore, but I wouldn't say I like it. I'm at a point where I just try to get through Giant Bowser without thinking about it. I don't find this fight annoying anymore, which is a huge plus compared to how I felt about it before. At this point in time, the fight will never get better than this, since I don't think I can get this scarring out of my mind, which is why it isn't at the bottom, but at number 16. This was the only giant battle that surprisingly stayed in the same spot. It still is my second favorite giant battle. This one is very simple, where I don't think many people would hate it. While I do think it is still a very slow fight in the grand scheme of things, I think there is still some merit. Even though it is the first giant battle, I do think the fight's modifications in hard mode were a worthy addition. The attacks are pretty precise to dodge compared to normal mode, which is a welcome change. I also think that the attacks were pretty solid. While they aren't as good as they are with Giant Bowser, they are decent in their own right, especially for a first boss. The best part about this boss fight though is where he goes into his tornado. He transforms into either his normal form, his flying form where you can't use your hammer, or his car mode where you can't use your jump. He shows his eyes rapidly in each of these forms, but the last one shown is the form he is in. Even then, it's pretty difficult to tell. These are all great points, but there are some problems. Obviously, I mentioned before that the first 3 giant battles are pretty slow. This obviously applies here. The slow pace just really ruins the fight, and it's pretty disappointing. The other reason though is you only having 3 things to do. You can jump, you can use a hammer chop, or you can use a rhythm mushroom. That's really it. This is a pretty basic arsenal of attack compared to what we see after Mount Pajamaja. Hammer uppercut and drill spin are used so many times throughout later battles, so here it feels pretty basic. It's just like for early battles in this game where you don't have any bros attacks. It just makes the attacks on your end kinda basic and boring. Robo Drill Digger as a first boss and as a giant battle really isn't terrible, but its basicness makes it not better than where it is at number 15. This is the second to last hoorah on the list, and I would say I like these battles from here on out. Sorrowfish just lacks something extremely interesting to bring it higher. Just like the other hoorahs, there is a win condition with this fight, and I think it's the best one out of the 4. You have to get an excellent attack every single time against Sorrowfist, or he will fully heal and the fight restarts. I think that his attacks are pretty solid. They are somewhat difficult to dodge and pretty interesting. And yeah, that's really it. There really isn't that much. It's a mini boss fight that is severely unmemorable because of the existence of Big Massive. Aside from unmemorability though, I don't really dislike stuff about this fight. I just wish there was more to it, which is why it's number 14. This might possibly be the most underrated boss from Mario & Luigi Dream Team. I mean, think about how incredible a boss like this is to make it to number 13. A boss that is before you get any Luiginary attacks, and a boss that is super early in the game. Not only does this boss just naturally have good attacks, it has a great concept. Dreamy Mario splits himself into copies of himself, and he tries to mix up the Marios so he is hidden. Now you could attack the real Dreamy Mario and do the damage from your main jump, but not from the Luigis. That is actually the non-optimal strategy for this fight though. What the other option is, and what you were supposed to do, is attack the fake Dreamy Mario that is right next to the real version, so all the Luigis just pummel the real Dreamy Mario. This actually does more damage, and it makes you think on what you should be doing during the fight. Like I said before though, I think this boss also has good attacks. Not really from Dreamy Mario himself, but Intaspa sends fire, coins, and mushrooms at you, which is a good attack, as well as a screen chaser, which is a very unique attack, especially to this point of the game you're at. Of course, this boss isn't amazing. Not only do you not have any Luiginary attacks like I mentioned, you don't even have the hammer. Your attacks are going to be super basic, which is a bit disappointing. The strategy does save it a bit though, which is why it was able to be sent up this high. Also, the attacks would have been more unique, I guess, but there really aren't any problems with the boss itself that genuinely annoys me, which is why it landed so high. I feel like Heavy Zest might be hard to talk about since every positive or negative that has been mentioned in other Hua fights, especially Sorrowfist, will apply to this fight. Obviously, this is the highest ranking one aside from Big Massive, but obviously Big Massive was going to be the best one, that is clear as day. Heavy Zest has the win condition of winning in 3 turns. God bless the people who are severely underleveled for this fight because of that. He attacks more than once per turn, which is a necessity for this fight, since he will basically attack for only 1 turn. That is obviously a negative, but I think this was going to happen with any boss that has this type of win condition. So I wouldn't really knock it too much against Heavy Zest itself. His attacks are pretty good even if it was similar to Sorrowfist's. It has a much faster paced feeling compared to that fight, which is what edged it out for this list. I also like the pressure that is put onto you to do Luiginary attacks perfectly. Overall, this is a good fight. They did what they could, and for a mini-boss, it definitely deserves to be number 12. We are so close to the top 10, but Torque Screw barely misses out on it. I don't think there's too much of a reason on why, aside from the top 10 just having better things going for it. Torxur has good attacks that feel pretty unique up to this point in the game. This especially applies to my favorite attack that he does, which is when he takes Mario into the background and tries to drill into him. Luigi looks like he is doing nothing, but in actuality, normal enemies are trying to hit him while you are distracted. I love the multitasking that is needed for this attack, since while each attack on its own isn't too difficult, dodging both at once is pretty confusing. I am also grateful that Luigi gets a different bros attack than Mario. While Mario still suffers with the 3D red shell, Luigi gets the fire flower, which feels so much different compared to the 3D green shell. This boss fight feels like a great upgrade to Brobot. The only thing to point out that is strange is that with one attack, you can knock him over onto his back and he is much weaker. I find it a bit strange that he has a weakness like this, since you don't have any bros attacks that are specifically made to jump on an enemy. It's like if you fought Momoshka without the bye-bye cannon or the drop chopper. It's just kinda strange. Now obviously this isn't a complaint, but I have to fill the segment with something because there is literally nothing else to talk about. Bosses get better than this later in the game. It's really the only reason why it's number 11. Oh look, it's a better Bowser than Giant Bowser. When people mention this fight, I first think about how much I like Dreams Deep instead of the boss fight itself. I guess in that sense it gets overshadowed a bit in the game, but for me, it's mainly because there isn't too much with this fight, just like Torxur. He has decent attacks with his fire breathing, his punching, and most importantly, his screen chaser. His screen chaser is the only thing memorable to me in this fight because it is a great screen chaser. He breathes fire across the runway and you have to either jump over it or move away. You can't jump over the Purple Flames though, so you could get trapped. It's never happened to me, but the possibility is there. His Bat Army is also cool since you have to kill almost every single one at once or they will attack you back. This is where the Luiginary Ball starts becoming useful for the fight since you can hit every single one. I also found it pretty weird that you get the Luiginary Ball for this fight because other than the Bat Army, it feels pretty useless. Just like Torxur getting knocked over though, it doesn't really matter for this boss, it's just something to point out I guess. Bowser is a very solid fight and it lands at number 10. It's a great introduction to the game, but can we just get to more interesting boss fights please? Y'all like Popple from this game? I heard that most people don't, and I can understand why. I never really disliked him, or liked him in any game he is in, so I basically come into this boss fight with no opinion. And the boss fight itself, I mean if we're just talking about what Popple does in this fight, he does make it interesting. As I put it here in my notes, he is a clear nuisance. He makes Wiggler more annoyed at all three of you, he holds onto one of the bros to make it much harder to dodge Wiggler's attacks, and he even fights you at the end. We'll talk about fighting Popple later though. I think Wiggler has solid attacks, but I feel like whatever Wiggler brings is pretty overshadowed by Popple. You get the Slink Sniper before this as well, and just because of that, this boss fight becomes pretty unmemorable. Now I have gone on record saying that this is a pretty disappointing Popple fight, but a good Wiggler fight. I know I said this because for Popple fights, you get to attack either Popple or his minion, where in this fight you are forced to attack Wiggler first. I think at this point, while I do acknowledge that I wish we could attack them at the same time, it doesn't make it a bad Popple fight. I also said this is a good Wiggler fight because, maybe it's just because of how boring Wiggler fights are in both Superstar Saga and in Bowser's Inside Story. To be fair, when I replayed Bowser's Inside Story, I was very tired of that Wiggler fight because of how agonizingly basic it is to me. Here though, while Wiggler doesn't have the normal Wiggler concept, he is pretty unmemorable like the other two Wiggler fights just mentioned. It's pretty weird to say, but I think my opinion has flipped on this fight. I think it's a good Popple fight, but it's a pretty bland Wiggler fight. It would still be my third favorite Wiggler fight in the series, but my opinion has radically changed. Fighting Popple at the end honestly was more enjoyable in terms of the boss's attacks as well. It reminded me a lot of the third Popple fight in Superstar Saga, which, while a bit more bland compared to the other fights in that game, it did have more unique attacks. This fight could have been amazing. There was potential, but I'm now at a point of instead being disappointed in the wasted potential, I just decided to enjoy the boss that was in front of me, which is why it's number 9 on this list. My favorite giant battle in this game is, of course, the one that people hate the most. Now, I get why people don't like it, but I'm gonna need time to talk about the gyro controls, so let's first talk about why this is my favorite giant battle from this game. While I think people might disagree with this, I love the concept that this fight has. The Zkeeper is constantly trying to run away and we have to catch up to it. The only real way to catch up is by counterattacking what he sends at you, which will tire him out. Once you catch up the entire way, you drag him onto the ground and you damage him as much as possible. This is also paired with how great his attacks are in this boss battle. You throw logs at magic orbs, him flying right into you where you have to quickly decide to jump or duck, him sending explosive eggs at you, even the dimensional travel, which, while is my least favorite attack, was really cool to look at. You guys are probably shouting me to talk about the gyro controls. Don't worry, I'm almost there. The last real big positive that I kinda hinted at with the other giant battle segments is just how fast-paced this boss fight actually is. Unlike other battles, you don't ever stop to attack, to heal, to do really anything until you put him down and stun him for that short period of time. He's constantly sending different attacks at you while you are still running after him, which just feels very intense. This isn't a feeling I really get from any other boss battle from this game, so it's really why this giant battle just soared up on this list. Now it's time to get into why this boss fight is so hated. The gyro controls. I first want to say that I really wish they didn't exist, but I'm not going to single them out because I just don't like how giant battles control in general. Buttons just work. So why is the touchscreen, which is so much less reliable, being used here? One thing I will have to say though is that I almost mastered how to use the gyro controls. I'm not sure if this will work for everyone, but I will try to explain how to use them most effectively. First things first, you have to hold 3S exactly how the model shows you. Most people hold it like this, and you will struggle greatly since it wasn't designed that way. This is around where your hand should be. If you hold your hands down here, then I can promise you that the gyro controls will be more reliable. I will say that the gyro controls are very sensitive, so try to move it as little as you need to. If this doesn't work, then honestly continue hating the fight. Or continue hating the fight if you don't want to try it. It's your opinion at the end of the day, I'm not here to change it. One last thing before I wrap this segment up though. A lot of people completely hate this boss fight because of the gyro controls and the dimensional rift. Hate it all you want to, that doesn't really bother me. But when it comes to Giant Bowser, it apparently isn't as big of a problem. I actually think it's worse there on a technical level since it is so much further into the boss fight, and if you mess it up, it is going to be a while until you get back to where you were. If they are really that bad, then shouldn't you hate both of the fights? In either way, I think the main reason why it's fine there is because the rest of the fight is amazing to people in their eyes, which is kind of like how it is for the Zkeepers, so it can't really talk too much. I love this giant battle though. The attacks are great, the concept is amazing, it's super fast paced, everything I want in a giant battle is here in this fight. While the gyro controls are there, it doesn't hurt my opinion enough to put it lower than number 8. Big Massive is the definition of a good boss from this game. It takes all the good attacks from the different Hoorahs and puts them into one fight. It feels like he has many more attacks than other bosses from this game because of that. You could also say that his attacks would be less memorable or somewhat unoriginal because of this, but since they are stronger and slightly improved, I personally don't mind. I absolutely love the Screen Chaser in this fight. He takes his enemies and makes a stack like you would, and he tries to jump on you directly or knock you down with his shockwaves. It's super difficult to dodge and it gets very fast. He also has little minions like I mentioned, and they are the exact same as they are with the other Hoorahs. Either way, it is an improvement to have them here. I don't really dislike anything about this fight. I guess I wish you had better Luigi attacks at this point in the game, but even then that's not really that big of a problem. The other bosses just have more going for it, and that's the only reason this boss is number 7. I think nowadays the Elite Trio is a bit overrated, but I can't say I don't like this boss fight. The concept of having to take down all 3 bosses at once was executed very well here. Since all 3 members have different amounts of health, and they're all positioned pretty differently on the battlefield, it's pretty difficult to take them all out. Especially since you don't have any Luiginary attacks yet that control where the damage will be dealt, aside from maybe the Luiginary hammer and the stack. The only complaint with it is that they only heal 1 HP when they get revived, and that Paratrooper only heals 30 HP for each mushroom. It's just a bit underwhelming compared to what it could have been, but it doesn't hurt the boss fight too much. I do love that since there are 3 bosses, they all get to attack. I think it is clear to you guys that I love when bosses attack more than once per turn. And while the attacks are probably not as good as the top 5's attacks, they are still fun to dodge. The bullet bill was an interesting concept that I somewhat forgot about with this fight. The screen chaser was also pretty fun and unique to dodge as well. There really isn't too much to say about this fight that is good or bad. The fight speaks for itself, and that is why it's number 6. I guess I probably should have clarified at the beginning that the last Kamek fight was going to be the only one on this list. It would have been hard to rank the other fights for a reason that is also included in this fight, so I'll talk about it a bit later. This fight though is kind of like the Elite Trio on a bit of steroids. While yes, they don't revive each other when they go down, this fight is so much more difficult with much more going on. Each of the 4 Kamek copies does a different thing, which is insane. They do really difficult attacks, and they can also heal each other. And unlike the Elite Trio, the healing is so much stronger. There is also a great screen chaser for this boss fight where the blue Kamek chases you in front of the thwomps and you have to avoid them. He also shoots magic behind you at different speeds, which makes it much more difficult to dodge. The red Kamek does this insanely difficult broom attack that I think I've only successfully dodged once in that boss fight. The only negative that I have to point out for this fight is that to me personally, I still think it's super unmemorable. This goes for every single Kamek fight, which made it almost impossible for me to rank the other fights. This fight at least does have things that makes it stand out, like the strong healing and him doing 4 attacks at once, but the unmemorable nature of this fight keeps it at number 5. I'm gonna say it right now. These top 4 fights, in my personal opinion, don't have any negatives in the slightest. The only thing separating them is how strong the positives are, and that is the simple reason why Palladium is number 4 here. I like a decent amount of things about this fight. I like that you have to destroy his arms first to get him to sink to the floor. This is very necessary too because of your newest bros attack, the Jetboard Bash, only being able to hit ground enemies. It's also appreciated that the arms have so much health than you would think. When he is down on the ground, his little minions in the background try to heal his arms so he can get back up. Glad that happened, since obviously if he was just stuck on the floor after you destroy his arms, that would make a pretty pathetic boss fight in my personal opinion. His minions don't really do too much since they just hang out in the background. I wish they were more in the foreground since they could do so much more in the fight instead of just healing, but I'm at least glad that they did that. I really like his attacks though. They are very fast paced and very difficult to dodge, which is very appreciated. His attacks when he gets his arms destroyed though are not great, to be honest. While it does make sense since he is much weaker, which is reflected in his attacks, I do wish that his attacks were just great throughout. That, and that his attacks in general were less memorable compared to the top 3, are the main reasons why he is number 4. This boss fight is so polarizing to so many people. They hate the boulder attack and how tanky his health is. My response is pretty simple: get good at Dream Team. While that isn't normally a good response for most things in a video game, it does apply here to me because the things that people have problems with for this fight are problems that just completely go away once you get good at this game. I have a fun fact for you guys. Momoshka sent the boulder attack at me 3 times during this fight. I counted. I dodged it every single time with ease. It's all about timing for this attack, and while I do admit it's difficult to nail, it is genuinely fun because of that. I also think that Momoshka has some of the most unique attacks in the game. The attack where he chases one of the bros and the other has to jump on his head to nail Momoshka in his head is super creative. I also like when you get hit by the snowball. You have to jump out of it in the right way so you don't take damage. His attacks are just so difficult and so memorable to me personally. This is also paired with the concept that this boss offers. His weak point is his head, which means that you have to either jump on him, use the bye-bye cannon, or the drop chopper. That seems very simple, right? Well, with just that it is. He does try to cover that weak spot constantly throughout the boss fight though. He brings in enemies that you saw while climbing Mount Pachamacha to get him helmets. These helmets have varying levels of protection, but you have to take them all out, or he will put on the strongest helmet left on the field. Great concept along with the ending concept. Instead of just instantly blowing up into stars like the other bosses, his shell breaks and you have to jump on him with each of the bros. It's kind of strange, but it's a super memorable part about this fight. Momoshka feels like a boss that Alpha Dream just shoved whatever unique things they could think of for a boss fight into it, and it surprisingly worked way better than it probably should have. Instead of it being a messy boss fight, it is a super difficult one that has a lot of things going for it, which is why it's number 3, and also my favorite boss fight that isn't a final boss. Phantasma used to be my number 1 boss in this game, but that has changed. I do want to point out that I didn't refight Phantasma X on my latest playthrough. I definitely should have, but I kind of just forgot. That doesn't count for this list since obviously those are 2 separate boss fights, but it would have been interesting to talk about my old favorite boss fight in all the Mario RPGs. I will say though that no part of Phantasma got worse in my eyes. The only reason it got brought down to number 2 was because of how good the number 1 spot got to me. On to the actual fight itself, and what is there to say? I guess I'll talk about how amazing the music is in this fight. It's very intense, and I'm glad it was shown at the very beginning of the game, since it's a great callback here. The Intaz Munchies was also a good addition to the fight, as each time he eats a couple of them, it boosts how strong his attacks are. And let me tell you, they are very strong! It also leads to the attack of Phantasma taking Dreamy Luigi away from you and putting him inside one of the Intaz Munchies. You can also eat that one munchie, and dear God, you are in a lot of trouble if he does that. But what happens when you get hit by one of his attacks? The obvious answer is that you take damage, and while you aren't wrong, there is also something else that could happen. When you get hit by an attack, there's a chance that a purple fog starts to surround you. This purple fog puts you to sleep while you are in the dream world. That is pretty dangerous, especially because when this happens, Phantasma starts chasing you down. You have to find the right hole to fall down into out of around 8. The only real way to reveal them without going in is to jump over them. This is already difficult to do, but there is added difficulty because Phantasma starts shooting fire at you. If you go down the wrong hole, you have to guide Mario down to avoid saw blades. You have basically no invincibility frames during this, so you could get hit back to back to back and die. If you go down the right hole, there are coins and mushrooms to heal you a little bit. Speaking of healing, I like that Dreamber is by your side throughout the entire fight. He doesn't do too much, but he does heal you 30 HP after every single turn, which is obviously appreciated. And Phantasma, aside from the sleep attack, also has great attacks in general. My favorite is definitely the Screen Chaser since it is so difficult to dodge, but if you do, it does a lot of damage back to Phantasma. The only reason why Phantasma is below the number 1 spot though is just because he doesn't have as many attacks as the number 1 does. The attacks in this fight are all really fun to dodge and are super unique, but the number 1 spot has more of the same quality of attacks. Phantasma is an amazing final boss for the Dream World, and I'm glad it held up so beautifully on my latest playthrough, making it absolutely deserve number 2. Here is my new favorite boss from this game. Ever since I started making videos on Dream Team, I always had the debate between Dreamy Bowser and Phantasma as to which final boss was better. This latest playthrough, my opinion on Dreamy Bowser just soared like crazy, and the negatives I said for this fight are gone. I said that this boss fight was too easy. A lot of people disagree with that claim, and I now disagree with it as well. It's on par with Shiny Robo Bowser in terms of difficulty, where it isn't super difficult, but it isn't a pushover. I think the attacks by Dreamy Bowser are insane. I don't even think I can really name every single great attack from this fight. Because of that, I won't try to. Unless I really love the attack, it's not worth mentioning since it would take way too long. The concept of the fight is simple, but very effective. I love how he blocks his weak point with his right hand. You have to destroy his right arm first to actually do damage to Dreamy Bowser at all. His left hand, while it doesn't have as much of a use, it still does do the attack where he takes one of the bros. You have to either wait or damage his left arm to make him throw the other bro, and you have to catch him in a very difficult way, but it makes it more fun because of that. There's also a way for him to heal both himself and his arms. He spawns a ton of dreamy enemies to attack you while he goes into the background and eats meat. Speaking of the enemies, if you love the attack while fighting Dark Bowser from Bowser's Inside Story, where he sends a ton of dark enemies at you, this is just an upgraded version of that. While there are less different types of enemies sent at you, you have to dodge with both of the bros, and they can send different enemies at each bro, which makes it very difficult since you have to multitask. He can also send a huge shockwave, which does kill those enemies, but you have to dodge it. That is also my favorite attack in the entire game, but it is also tied with another attack from this fight as well, and that is the Screen Chaser. The Screen Chaser for this fight is the hardest attack to dodge in the entire game. You have to dodge 3 columns of fire at the same time, as well as Bowser trying to send shockwaves at you. This goes on for a long time, which makes it more and more intense. The music as well just makes the boss fight so intense. Not only does it sound awesome, it just gives a great feeling to this fight. It's also appreciated that you have all the bros attacks for this fight since I just love the Z-Egg. I mean, as well as a Star Rocket, but I just love the Z-Egg for this fight. This fight is everything I wanted from a final boss from the series, and it is an amazing ending to this game. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like, and if you lasted this long, you might as well subscribe. I really appreciate that. I also have the podcast called The Flymates, which will be on the screen right now and in the description below, but other than that, G-bye.